This is the Forlo Micro entry into the 24 YEP budget build. So a little bit about the competition for those who are not aware. It's really designed around building something inexpensive and forcing you to be creative with certain solutions. It is $150 budget, and that excludes the transmitter, receiver, battery in that total. And it has a maximum of 3 3D printed parts. And since we make bodies, we used those parts on the body. So we'll get into that in a little bit. Any stock parts are considered free. So I come from a rock crawling background, and we go wheeling all the time, and the bodies we design are based around the rigs that we go out with, right? So we want to highlight, obviously, some of the stuff that we make. So this is based on a CJ that I drive that was a competitive rig in the late 90s, mid 90s, and probably should have been retired decades ago, but you keep throwing money at it and keep trying to make it better. So the intention here is a rig that had its glory day and is a little rough around the edges. So let's get into the parts that make up this rig before we get into aesthetically what it looks like. So like I said, stock parts were free. So we're using the stock transmission mount. We're using stock links that have been modified, and we can get into a little bit of that. We're using the stock shocks on here with some little additions. And pretty much everything else has been replaced. So big cost on these setups is going to be the motor, the ESC, the transmission mount, that whole system. So we went through a few iterations, tried some AliExpress setups, and ended up with the Goop RC setup at, let's see, $48.99. So motor, ESC, transmount, transmission, those 4 pieces for under $50. That's hard to beat. Few downsides: it's big, it sits really tall, it's way too fast. This thing is almost a drift car if you get it on a smooth surface. Has decent slow speed control. The torque is not the greatest, but it's okay for what it is. But yeah, I mean, that's a hell of a value if you're looking for something and you've got the room to spare. If you're using a body that doesn't, have an interior, has a cab or whatever, and size isn't a primary concern, a decent thing to look at. The other big spend on this was the axles. These are the Mias version 2 axles in nylon. They're the white ones. And the only reason they're the version 2 is I was impatient and didn't want to wait for the version 1. That'd save me another $5. But so this whole build could have been $5 cheaper, but I do like the version 2 a little bit better, specifically because of this screw in the bottom. We've had problems because if you maintain your rigs 100%, you won't have a problem with these screws falling out. But if you're lazy like me, trying to get a replacement for the V1 that goes into the axle, have to get it right from Mias, and it's kind of a pain in the butt, and you don't want your rig to be down. So that'd be the only real difference between doing a version 1 and version 2. Those were $58.50. And for that amount of money to get all your steering links, your servo mount, the gear reduction in the rear, the steering angle that comes with these axles. It's just, you can go the nickel and dime route with a stock axle and manually trim it out and do axle extensions and add brass and do all these things, and I just don't know that you come out ahead. That's a hell of a value that they have with those axles. So we tried to fit those in as a primary element to make this thing performant. The servo is the PTK. It's a nice budget servo. It's the green and silver one. It's just been spray painted. I probably have a dozen of these servos. I've used them on a ton of builds. They're super reliable, decent strength, decent speed. Hard to fight buying another one. So this one, I went back and found one that I got for $19. They're probably closer to $30 now, $25 now. Depends on how many of them that you buy and a go and where you get them from. You can get them down around that $20 mark, especially on like a Black Friday deal, some kind of a sale deal. You can certainly get them. What's next? Okay, the tires. These are the Razor Wire, the Upgrade RC Razor Wire. I've cut off all the lugs inside and out, narrowed them down a little bit, and they were $20 in the cart, and I had an $18 credit, so they cost me $2, which isn't totally normal, but at $20, they're totally worth buying that tire. At this size, the amount of traction you get, and decent scale look, those are a great option if they've got them in stock. The other tire wheel combo we looked at to try and keep the budget in line would be the Proline trenchers. They're in a 57. They come with the little plastic wheels. So we initially went this route, trying to get additional weight in there, using some brass rings in the internals, because these tires are great. Grip really, really well. Excellent value at, I think they're $25, something like that. But ended up going this route because we got some free 1.3 wheels. So these are the first time I've ever used a 1.3 wheel. I typically use a 1.0. And we got these for free, but the cheapest I found them, I can't remember where it was, but it was a 10% off deal. It was $18.89. So that's a 1.3 aluminum wheel from Injora. They've been rattle canned with the same spray paint, that stainless weldable spray paint. And they are running stock foams in here in the tires, nothing special in there. And then, okay, now we get into some of the funner stuff, some of the hand done stuff. And so let's stick with the axles for a minute. These are brass washers you can get at Home Depot. I had a whole bunch of them. So there's 2 of them in there. And I did use a Dremel tool on the inside to get them to seat on the face of the brass piece in here, and just super glued them on there. I think I used a metal glue in there and then just touched it with super glue to keep it in place while that cured out. And then you have to touch the inside of the wheels a little bit to make sure they clear. I think I swapped front wheels. They're pretty tight, but they do clear in there. In addition to that brass, I took some of the kids' Crayola clay out in the garage and used a little piece and mopped up as many metal shavings in the garage as I could. So that's black Crayola clay with metal shavings in it. I don't know how much it adds, but it was free-ish, and I could get it on there. And then I just cover the whole thing in super glue to give it a little more strength. It's still pretty pliable. Who knows how long of a solution that is, but it's held up to using this and testing. So probably better solutions, certainly better solutions out there that are 3D printed, but we couldn't do that solution. Okay, putty. Okay, so mag mounts on here. Because we're using the 3 pieces on the body, we had to get creative with what else could we use. These mag mounts are construction wedge. So it's this end piece, these 3 pieces here, just cut off, sanded, and then bored out a little bit. We use a 9 mil round, 3 mil tall magnet in our kits, and that's what I was looking for. You have to find the green ones. There is like a gray one, grayish purple wedge. That's a smaller hole in there. So if you're using a 8 mil magnet, maybe that's a better option for you. But those are just glued in. So yeah, that's a wedge. Going down my parts list here. The rear link standoffs in here. So these are just brass standoffs. You can buy a giant kit on Amazon, M2, with some screws in there. I'm using the hollow ones and then just running a longer screw through it to pick up these links. I think these are stock links off of maybe a Red Cat. So it is a larger diameter hole in there to accommodate for that. But the links are stock, they are plastic, they have a lot of flex to them. So we chose to go outboard with these to give it some stability side to side. When they were inboard, this thing was shifting all over the place. So that just helps with side to side stability. And then these are little standoffs you get with the shocks on most sets of shocks, just to help with clearance on the chassis here. Yeah, stock drive lines, there's a standoff here to get a little more length. I got a little zealous and started trimming drive lines with one configuration and shortened it up too much. So I just want to make sure that it had enough thread in there to stay in there. Okay, links. Oh yeah, the one link at the top here. One of the key things with a lot of these rigs is trying to get this caster angle, trying to roll this axle back to get better clearance on the body, to get it so that when you're climbing, you can hook the inside of this. That's done with that caster angle. So to do that, you either need to lengthen this link or you need to shorten the upper link. And I went the route of the upper link. So those are just M3 screws that are screwed into link ends and screwed in there. Works fine, throws that caster angle way out there. And when you're using stock links, especially going to a stock mount here, you don't have any adjustment here. I can't shorten this. I can't bend those a lot. You know, you probably bend them a little bit. So it makes you deal with that caster with those top links. And it's not enough angle on the output to really affect that. And part of the reason is because of kind of the star of the show on this rig is this chassis. So this chassis, because we've used the 3D printed parts on the body, again, trying to find solutions, is one of these black hangers from IKEA. It is this portion right here. So we went around the house and just tried to figure out what could we use. And when I say we, this is my son and I trying to figure out what to do here. So I've made a jig that shows you how to center that. You just take some loopers that you would, trim plants with is what I found is the most effective. Get in there and this thing snaps right away. Rough trim it off to length, get it close, and then the jig will show you where to trim it at the top, overall length, get it so that it sits down inside that lower, it's hard to see my screen, get it to sit down in there. And then there's a bunch of holes in the jig where you can establish, I'm going to use these top ones for my magnet mounts, and my skid's going to go roughly here, and my shock mounts are here, my upper links are here. You just kind of pick some starting points. Now, I didn't have this when I was setting this setup up. So if you look at the side of these rails, there's holes all over the place. I had to figure out what was going to work and what wasn't. So there's a ton of holes in this chassis, but this will help eliminate that use case. I actually built a second one and it worked fairly well. Just went back here, said I'm going to use these two, took like a silver Sharpie and marked, I'm going to start with this hole and this hole so I know which ones I'm drilling through, and just used a simple pin vise drill bit, drilled through them, did it on both rails, got them in the same ballpark, and then kind of went from there. And I only had to move one link after that in its configuration. I didn't take it back apart, but that jig is free download. It's on the Etsy store. Well, it's $1 because they charge a bunch of fees. So that's to cover Etsy's fees, but you can get that. The second part of using a chassis like this, because there's no prescriptive holes. Like you're on your own. You've got to choose your own adventure to figure out what's going to work. So there's some good stuff where you can change the angle of the skid pretty readily and correct for this angle of the skid with changing how it actually mounts in there. You're free to do whatever you need. I think these are ABS maybe. I don't know. They're super stiff. They hold a thread real well so you can screw directly into them. It's a hanger, so there are certain things that you're going to have to deal with, especially with stock shocks. We've had to rig up, these are the ends of servo horns, like that quad servo horn that comes with every servo. I'm sure that they use them on planes, but we never use them. Just trimmed off to get us down so I can run them inboard, because the magnet mounts are slightly wider than what you would find in like a standard magnet mount width, right? So all the geometry is off just a little bit from what it would be stock. Pluses and minuses there. That's the basics. So a lot of decisions, you do this because you've got to stabilize left to right. And in doing that, that means I have to pull the links back here, and that means the angle changes on this, and I have to change where this mounts on the you can see that it moved, this is moved down and this is moved back, and we've adjusted shock angles on here and rolled them way back and put them much more vertical, and just played around with how do I get the basics to work and not bind up and still function. The geometry on this thing is not perfect for sure. It's a bit of a skateboard. It doesn't have a ton of flex to it, but still functions fairly well. And it's definitely a project, especially if you're looking to break out of the generic, I'm going to buy a chassis on Amazon and put it together. It's just another thing. This is a choose your own adventure, and it's kind of fun to just create something and see what you can and can't do with it. So the file for the jig also has our magnet mounts, which are standard width. So this piece is in that file, so you can use that instead. You can see it's slightly narrower, not a lot, but it's slightly narrower. That piece is in there. The don't think I have an example here, but we've got a skid that is a two-piece. So you've got the main skid, and then you've got a divorced piece that you can mount the rear links to in here. So there's two separate pieces. That's in that same file. Second one I built, we used that instead of like these brass standoffs. It's just a printed piece, so it's a little easier to work with. Don't have to buy something special for it. So that's in with that jig. Let's see, is that the end of, I think that's the end of the custom pieces. But just because what I do professionally is designing systems and designing ways to make things repeatable and scalable, my brain automatically goes to how do I help the next person create something like that. So this product came out of that. That you can download the jig that's used to center everything up and keep things square. I didn't use this, but I really wanted it when I was setting up that. So this is another downloadable file, buck on Etsy, right? And this just helps keep the setup square, straight, flat across the top. You know, it's totally adjustable to make whatever wheelbase you want to set up on here. So that came out of this project. Again, you can download that. A bunch of free stuff in there. Okay, now we're to the body. And again, this was based around kind of the rig that's been used hard, put away wet, right? So it's got some distressing on there. This body was, because we draw all of these from scratch in CAD, these are all, we can adapt to whatever we need to. So it is narrowed up. So this would be a 5-slot grill, something more akin to what someone's going to do if they're building a buggy out of a CJ. A lot of times everything has been narrowed in. So they're going to cut the grill, take a couple of slots out of there and narrow that up. That just helps keep everything more at a buggy scale, not necessarily a Jeep scale as far as width. So that was changed on this. It inherently created a whole other series of bodies that we call our 5S. So there's CJs and YJs and variations on that we've started to create. The cage is from our Feather series, and it uses this radius on the back, which is super helpful when you roll this thing over. Especially if it's straight back, it has a tendency of rolling and righting itself a lot of times if you've got enough momentum. That's why that was designed. The bottom was cut to match the angle that chassis returns up in there. And this is the name of the hanger if you go to the IKEA website. And you can get I think it's a 5-pack for $250 or something like that, or it's a 10-pack. I want to say it was like 5 chassis setups for dirt cheap, right? So this is printed as one piece. The cage is a second. And in this case, we printed the grill as the third piece, even though we could technically print that as a 2-piece. The body and the cage. So the fuel cell is baked into the rear deck. The rear deck is baked into the body. And depending on the series that you look at, we do some with it baked in like that, and some of them, as you get more kind of scale oriented or separate pieces. So you could do, a wood deck or swap it out or do whatever you want. This is more geared towards building an economical competition rig, so it's baked into it. The fuel cell is baked into it, and the reason that's baked into it is that this, a CJ body is going to inherently have a drop from under the hood to the deck height, there's a difference around 9 mil, 10 mil in those two heights. And you have to accommodate for that with this chassis to get it up to keep the body low. So the magnet mounts are hidden inside the fuel cell there. So that's part of the print. The filler neck is styrene, a little piece of styrene. The filler is the head of a rivet that's cut off. And the vent tube and the return and supply lines came off of packaging like this. These tubes. This is like a dollar store travel toothbrush kit. It's just the plastic off of there. And now the body kits do come with the lights, headlights, corner lights, all that kind of stuff. But because we ran out of 3D printed parts, actually robbed the junk drawer and used the bottom of these Crayola little mini markers to do the headlights in here. So those are glued in there. And technically, to fit the rules, we'll have to pull out the tail lights and pull out the corner lights of this thing. But it does come with the body if you buy one of these. The logos, because I have a bit of a shake and I can't paint with any kind of detail, these are reliefs or standing proud of the print itself. So you can buy these with the logos or without. And I did it that way so that it was easier to paint for me. So this is painted blue and then sanded back to expose the plastic underneath it to get that white on blue look, and then clear coated on top of it like a matte clear. And then some of these are touched up with a bit of paint here and there. Some of the logos of the products that are used on here. This little ghost is from the hot sauces that I make here. That's the logo from that. So just kind of personal touches on there. What else on here? Custom little license plate that we've started making. And then the sand. The sand that's on here, last time as in St. George before it got way too hot, took a bunch of sand from the sand dunes. Anyone that wheels down at Sand Hollow knows that this fine-grained red sand gets on everything. It's everywhere, and it's impossible to get off of there. So we glued some sand on there and did quite a bit of it on the undercarriage. You know, certain scale attributes, right? There's a ton of sand in there. Okay. All right, so I'm looking at my little notes here so I don't forget anything. Okay, recommendations. The hanger chassis is a fun project. If you've built a few setups and you want to do something different, you just want to explore what's possible, but repeatable, you could build a handful of these and just play around with where that could be, and it's dirt cheap, right? Almost free. I would say that you'll want a few builds under your belt before you start exploring this, without prescriptive values of where things mount. You kind of have to know ballparks. You kind of have to know, I need it to be about here. I'm going to use these links, that type of thing. But that's a fun project, especially if you're involving kids and you're building a few of them, and you can get some variations using the same basic setup. It's akin to not using Legos in the set, but building whatever you want to out of the Legos you have provided. So it's a fun thing. And with the jigs, you can set things up and keep them repeatable. Other recommendations: use stock stuff until it breaks, until it doesn't fit the need. The trans mounts are fine. the transmissions for the most part are fine. We actually tried to do a custom trans plate out of some architectural panel. It was like dual aluminum with a resin fill in the middle, trying to get this accurate and not have it shift things. So the whole rig was set up on a parallelogram, was very difficult at that scale, so we abandoned it. But in that process, because that transmission housing is plastic, broke both of the mounting screws and then eventually one of the ones that goes in from the bottom. So the housing on that transmission is really suspect. So if you're going to be moving things quite a bit, it's probably worth just getting an aluminum housing and being done with it, something that's going to hold up. Links are generally fine, stock links, as long as you don't need to change length or angles dramatically. Those links are fine. If you are moving to a lot more of these custom setups where you're going to want to play fine-tune lengths and straighten things out, certainly get some aftermarket links. They're relatively inexpensive. Drive lines, stock ones are totally fine until they start losing their pins and falling apart. Your stock drive lines are totally fine. The big things to focus on is weight, tires, axle, steering degree, right? Spend the money there, I'd say. I think these Mias axles are an excellent value. A better, stronger servo is obviously always going to happen. The stock servos are just problematic. If I'm starting from zero, would I buy a stock unit and build from there? Maybe. Probably not. I think you end up throwing away most of it and replacing the vast majority of it, so you're probably better off getting some inexpensive setups and building from there. But the bug will bite you, and you're going to have more than one. Yeah, it really depends on what you're trying to build. If you're trying to build something compy, or if you're trying to build something scale, this is trying to find a balance in between there, where we still have a lot of scale look, but it still has the functional ability. Like it still has some compy attributes to it, and it can still climb. That's kind of where we're aimed at. It's what we find fun. So yeah, that is the build for the competition, and hopefully it does okay against all the 1.8 super compy buggies. Hopefully it holds its own. We'll see.